Minister James Cleverly.
Thank you, Ms Miller, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I am grateful for the honourable member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough for securing this incredibly important debate. The situation in Yemen is indeed beyond despair. As she has rightly said, it remains the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with two-thirds of Yemenis, over 20 million people, requiring some form of humanitarian assistance. The crisis results from a perfect storm of poverty, war and economic collapse, and has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is clear, and she says that, unfortunately, this is not the first time I have said this, but it is true nonetheless. It is clear that any sustainable solution can only really begin when the conflict comes to an end. That is why the UK government is working, and indeed has worked, with countries in the region and the wider international community to bring about peace, as well as playing our part in directly addressing the humanitarian suffering. Today I'm going to give an overview in response to the questions she has asked to the various strands of the work that we have done and are doing. Of course.
First of all, I would like to thank the honourable member for having this debate, but like all of us, I wish we weren't here. I wonder if the Minister could give us a little more information, because unless there is a political solution, this is just going to be going on for another 7 years. But it seems a real unwillingness on the part of the main players to come round the table. So could he give us any hope that the UK interventions, the UN interventions, are going to make that meeting happen so we can negotiate peace in the near future?
The honourable lady, who I know, with a number of others, both represented in this room and elsewhere, takes a very close interest, and she and I have discussed this both formally and informally previously. I would wish that I could give her the certainty that she asks for. The sad truth of the matter is, at this point, I'm not able to. However, we will continue to work both with partners in the region, including those who are directly involved in the conflict, and indeed, when the opportunity arises, directly with representatives of the Houthis themselves. That channel is one that has been denied to us most recently, but nevertheless, we will continue to work with anyone and everyone who we feel can help bring about peace in Yemen, so that the real work of rebuilding that country and its society can start in earnest. In terms of the humanitarian support, the UK government has been one of the largest donors since the crisis began, having contributed more than £1 billion in aid. We pledged 87 million this year and have already distributed 85% of it. And whilst I'm conscious that our contribution this year is smaller than in previous years, for reasons which the House is well familiar, the importance of the timely distribution of our aid cannot be overstated. Despite the financial pressures at home, we remain one of the largest donors to the UN appeal. Our funding this year will provide at least 1.6 million people with access to clean drinking water. It will support 400 clinics to offer primary health care, and it will feed 240,000 people. And those people represent some of the most vulnerable Yemenis. And we feed 240,000 every month, or we help feed 240,000 every month. We are working with partners to ensure that priority is given to those most in food insecurity, to the marginalised communities and vulnerable displaced people, as has been mentioned, and to those living directly in conflict-affected areas. Sadly, and yet predictably, the conflict has been particularly hard on women and girls. Reports of gender-based violence have risen significantly since the conflict began. This is totally unacceptable, and it is why we are co-hosting the International Gender Coordination Group with the Netherlands later this month to boost international efforts to tackle gender-based violence. To improve the life chances of newborns and young mothers, we have funded UNICEF to provide over 2 million pregnant women and new mothers with nutrition counselling and education since 2018. And we expect to support more women with reproductive health services over the next year. Since 2018, we have helped 85,000 women receive trained medical support during childbirth, and we expect to support 50,000 more by March 2022.
Thank the Minister for giving way. And of course, these are all good things to be doing. But would he answer the question as to when the cut in aid of 50% is going to be restored?
I and other ministers have made it clear that the reduction in ODA spend is driven by the worst economic crisis that this country has faced in 300 years. Luckily, not luckily, thankfully, because of our world-class vaccine rollout programme, our recovery economically seems to be working at a pace, and we have the fastest recovery of our G7 partners. Hopefully, that will mean that we are able to recover to the 0.7%, which is where we are committed to return as soon as possible. But unfortunately, I'm not able to give an accurate prediction of the future trajectory of the UK economy, and therefore cannot give her a specific point in time. But that remains our aim and commitment to return to 0.7% as soon as the economic conditions allow. I will.
Minister for giving way and for his attention to this subject. Could I just ask a double-headed question? I'm sorry, but obviously time is limited. What is the accountability that the money is actually going to where it should go? And when was the last time he spoke to Martin Griffiths?
So to answer the second one first, I speak with Martin quite regularly. I can't remember the precise date I last spoke to Martin. Martin and I have an excellent working relationship, and we do speak quite regularly. With regard to accountability, we take the prevention of aid diversion incredibly seriously. We probably have one of the most robust frameworks of donors, and we always ensure where possible that we minimise aid diversion, because we know, particularly in areas of conflict, that diverted aid can go to actually reinforce the conflict rather than the humanitarian aid. This is an ongoing piece of work in this area, as it is with all others.
I'm sure the Minister is aware that Martin Griffiths is no longer the UN penholder, but he is, of course, the coordinator for the UN humanitarian relief. So could he detail if he's had a meeting or a conversation with Hans Grunberg, who is the new UN penholder?
Yes, indeed. As I say, Martin's role has changed, but he's still an influential player. I spoke with Hans shortly after his appointment. To further expand on the point that the Honourable Lady made, to ensure humanitarian spending is effective, we channel our support through organisations with a strong record of delivery and fund the independent monitoring of our own programmes. Ministers and officials also coordinate closely with other donors in the UN and NGOs to maximise the effectiveness of the global response and improve access to conditions in Yemen. For example, in August, I had discussions with David Greasley, the UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen, and I stressed the UK aid must not be diverted from those in need. At the UN General Assembly, my Right Honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, recently urged parties to allow humanitarian access across the country in accordance with international law principles. Aid alone, however, will not solve the crisis facing Yemen and Yemenis. We are working with the US, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates through the Economic Quad to help support the stabilisation of Yemen's economic crisis, as well as through the joint FCDO USAID economic programmes. We are providing technical support to the Central Bank of Yemen on foreign exchange and reserve management, as well as technical advice to the Yemeni Prime Minister's Executive Bureau to deliver much-needed economic reform. And we're also working closely with the IMF and the World Bank to provide development finance that can help alleviate Yemen's hard currency crisis, which is driving depreciation of the Yemeni rial in government-held areas. The honourable lady, my former opposite number, mentions the Safa oil tanker and the environmental as well as the catastrophic economic impacts that is made. She is right to highlight it. She is wrong to say that the UK is not doing enough. She wrote to me, if I remember rightly, in September of 2020, exactly 2 months after I raised this issue. So I can assure her that I and the government are very alive to this issue, and indeed I brought this issue up when I had a face-to-face meeting with a representative of the Houthis on my trip to Oman in October of 2020, highlighting the importance of allowing access to that ship and repairs or transfers to take place.
Thank you. I appreciate the Minister's answer on this. Could he tell me then, with that conversation, what access the UN is going to have to that ship? Because as we know, there are 4 times as many tons of oil on there than was on the Exxon Valdez, which would lead to absolute catastrophic disaster if that leaked.
I'm precluded by time for going into the kind of detail that perhaps she would strive, but I have written extensively on this, and I can forward her the links of various statements that I have made and calls for international cooperation, including, as I say, directly with Houthis, which I would like to think has played a part in some access to that ship being allowed, but nowhere near as much as is deserved. And if members, if honourable and right honourable members will forgive me, I'm conscious that we are tight on time, and I do have a number of important points I still want to get through before we finish. The conflict has been punctuated with reports of violations of human rights and international human law, international humanitarian law. The UK government condemns all violations, including the denial of humanitarian access and the recruitment and use of child soldiers. We monitor, collate and analyse such reports and support the UN-led verification of them and the production of the UN Secretary-General's report on human rights and children affected by armed conflict. Accountability is key, and the UK regrets that the mandate of the group of eminent experts on Yemen was not recently renewed in the UN Human Rights Council. The group provided crucial reporting on human rights in Yemen. The UK government urges all parties to respect international humanitarian and human rights law, and we are working to secure a political solution that creates the conditions for legitimate government to improve the protection of human rights. COVID-19, as I said at the start of my speech, has compounded an already dire crisis. It continues to rip through the country with reports of overwhelmed intensive care units in both Sana'a and Aden. Last financial year, the UK provided 30 million to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in Yemen, which helped boost the resilience of the primary healthcare system. COVAX has allocated 2.3 million vaccine doses to Yemen, thanks in significant part to the UK's £548 million donation and ongoing support. We are discussing vaccination rollout with the WHO and other partners and are working to ensure equitable access across the whole of the country. As I said at the outset, the key to solving Yemen's humanitarian crisis is the ending of the conflict and negotiating a political settlement that holds. As I mentioned earlier, I spoke to the incoming UN Special Envoy, Hans Grunberg, and my notes here remind me of when I spoke to him also in August, to offer the UK government's continued support for his work to bring the parties to the negotiating table. We will do all we can to support those efforts, including as the UN Security Council lead on Yemen. Although the conflict and humanitarian crisis in Yemen do not get the media attention that they deserve, the UK government nevertheless is working doggedly to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. And we are using our diplomatic and humanitarian expertise to do so. We continue to be one of the top donors to the UN-led response. But we know that the only way to end a humanitarian crisis in the long term is the peaceful settlement to the conflict. That is why we have and will continue to play a leading role in moving the peace process forward and to continue the work to support the UN Special Envoy, Hans Grundberg. Thank you, Madam.
The question is,